E tra I cambiamenti.
If we look at the changes that we mentioned before, would have been interested to ask Charlie Kupchan's opinion on this. He's describing the U.S. approach to the Middle East and how much the changes of the last year or so are going to matter, and what the perception of U.S. foreign policy is, or how it may be modified by the possibility of energy independence by 2020 or even earlier, thanks to shale gas and energy being produced from unconventional deposits. And the director of the German Marshall Fund, Ein Lesser, is a person who certainly knows a lot about the respective sensitivities of U.S. and European relations. And he wrote in Aspenia that it would be better to make use of transatlantic relations in a way that hasn't been exploited so far, which is the relationship with the South, and a way of developing relations with Latin America and the West. Because the two Americas are both interested, as is Europe, in contending with the growing power of Asia in the global economy and in global policy setting and decisions that affect the world. And this becomes more and more necessary if we take into account the changes in the current balance in energy production. So I'd like to ask Lesser to tell us a little bit more about this, what the need to reinforce the Atlantic relations on the southern side, on the southern flank. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Much. I think this question actually flows very naturally from one of the things Charlie Kupchan said in his remarks, and which I would support absolutely, which is that I think the Obama administration, and I think in a way Europe as well, is looking for something that you could call a lower maintenance foreign policy. You know, in a way, people are always expecting grand strategy from the United States. But the truth is, Paul Kennedy wrote about this in an interesting piece not too long ago, the truth is that, in fact, big powers rarely behave that way. They have a strategy of the image should be going down a stream and fending off things that come your way. And so I think also the reference to Iran is very important. So there are a whole series of things out there that will happen in foreign policy terms that any administration, whether, well, the Obama administration in the United States, but also Europe will need to deal with. Iran is certainly at the top of the list. There are other things. On this question of the Atlantic South and the role of South America and Atlantic Africa in that, which I think is very interesting, I think one of the drivers here is really this bigger question of power and competitiveness, both American and European, in relation to a rising Asia. This is driving all kinds of policies, but I think it is creating a certain anxiety about the future of the Atlantic space and the future of transatlantic relations. I don't think we're moving away from interest in Europe. After all, we've had multiple pivots in our history, you know, pivots to Europe, pivots to Asia. We're a bi-oceanic country, and so this is very, very natural. But there is a certain anxiety, I think, at the moment about our long-term power and competitiveness in relation to Asia. So when we come back to the Atlantic, I think there is a natural logic to say that transatlantic relations, in a traditional sense, are not firing on all of their cylinders, if I can use that image of an engine, that there is a whole half of the Atlantic space below the Washington-Brussels axis which has been neglected, especially during the Cold War, but even after the Cold War years. And so how do we re-engage with this world? It's very, very important if we think about Brazil, which you mentioned, but also Mexico. These are not always easy places for the United States to build a relationship with. We have a very fraught history of our own. in addition to a lot of close connections. And I think there is something potentially valuable in thinking about bringing these countries into an Atlantic conversation as well as a bilateral one. And I think this logic would apply for Europe as well in thinking about Brazil or in thinking about Mexico, or indeed about South Africa or Atlantic Africa. Lots of things that one could say about this. A final point I might make just is on this energy revolution, which of course is not just a North American shale gas revolution or a North American energy revolution, it's an Atlantic energy revolution in many ways. If we look at the growing role of Atlantic basin production, US, North America, South America, Caribbean, West African, in global energy trade. And this is going to have very big effects for the future, I'm quite sure. We could talk about the effects on the Middle East and other things, but I think it's all part of this growing logic of expanding this Atlantic conversation a bit southward.
Grazie.